Back when NiP went on their amazing run to the final of MLG X Games Aspen, I coined this term NiP magic to kind of describe the kind of weird zone that seems to arise when NiP gets deep into a tournament. We're talking like semi-finals, final, where suddenly a lot of factors which in everyday life, sort of the averages, how things play out by the numbers, suddenly seem to get affected by some kind of aura from the NiP players and the NiP team where it warps reality a bit, and somehow they're able to just play better than other teams under pressure. They're able to come back from losses. They're able to stop themselves getting destroyed completely by other teams. They seem to improve as the tournament goes on, whereas for a lot of teams that are very good, it gets harder as the tournament goes on. They become better on certain maps that maybe aren't their strong maps. Sometimes they're able to beat the best teams on those teams' best maps. And we find this thing, NiP magic. I mean, we've seen it in past instances, because here's the thing. If we're going to describe NiP magic, let's start out like part of it's being clutch. Like it's winning the big 1v1, but it's also being composed under pressure. It's also, even in scenarios that aren't just a 1v1 at the end of the round, having a player make a play here where if that doesn't happen, suddenly the whole game's lost. The opponent's at match point and you'd just be out of the tournament really early. You don't get swept when you're in this situation. It allows you to sort of claw and hang on in games, and it's part of what involves getting better as the tournament goes on, as the competition gets harder, as every moment means more. That's when these moments seem to be magnified. Now, what's interesting about this phenomenon of this NiP magic is that it actually isn't really something that was present during their time when they were the legendary team. When they were the team that had won like 8 tournaments in a row, when they went 87-0 in offline map wins, even through to early 2014 when they regained becoming the best team in the world and they'd won all these tournaments. They had 31 straight tournaments where they never placed below top 4. It was sort of in the background a little bit, but first of all, it wasn't as necessary. They would just roll over other teams. They had the strongest map pool of every team in the world by far. There were only 5 maps initially, and they were the only team that was strong on every map. As in their worst map, which at the time was probably like Dust 2 or Inferno, even that, they could beat all the best teams in the world on it, and definitely beat all the teams below that. Or at least have a chance to beat the best teams in the world on those maps. So their map pool was super strong. They were amazing on their home maps. In general, they didn't need this magic. This magic didn't really tend to manifest. They would just roll over teams, or they'd win close games where they had the better players on their team. And so as a result, it wasn't as present there. Maybe every now and then they'd have a crazy round. I mean, obviously the exist insane 1v3 on Dust 2 against what was it even called at the time, like End Faculty or something, whatever the team, or Team X it was called, the one that was Pronax and those guys, the future Lemondogs team. The thing is, during the legendary period, it didn't really need to exist. Previously, when we did see it, so when it started to manifest towards the end of the NiP era with Fiflaren, you could think to yourself, okay, well, it's a result of chemistry. It's a result of this intuitive way they play off each other. So as a result, it must be something to do with having the perfect 5-man lineup. Not perfect in the sense of every player's amazing and the team's the best lineup, because at that point in 2014, that wasn't the case anymore. But perfect in the sense of the way they fit together is just, you could never find a combination that worked together as well as that, or played off each other intuitively as well as that, or just had the natural chemistry, the communication, which was easily understood and didn't need a lot of explication, as you might have seen if you saw the POV of them at this tournament now. You might have thought all of that was contributing to the fact that it was contributed to by the fact that they had this 5-man lineup that they were never going to change. But actually, we've seen when they brought in Makalele and now Alu, 2 totally different players, totally different backgrounds, even different culturally, because Alu's very different and Makalele's very different to what Fiflaren was like. Somehow the NiP magic remains, whether it's from the core, the rest of the group, or something about them, it still remains there. Previously, when they were the legends, they had the best combination of roles. They basically, in every single position they had, so like in-game leader / middleman, Exist was one of the best to them for sure. Freiburg was the best entry fragger. He could consistently get those entries. Forrest was the best cleanup, second man in. His aim would just obliterate people in early days of CSGO. Get-Right was just the best player and the best lurker by far. And Fiflaren, as a support player, okay, I don't know that he was the best. There were others who were up there, but he was one of them, certainly. So they had some of the best players at every role. That's really not the case anymore. Now we see NiP magic is a lot more of it. A lot of it was before that they had the good lineup and they had the best combo of roles. I spot that probably Fnatic's in now, if you think about each person in their roles. That's a bigger contributing factor to how good they are. But now that the level of the NiP players across the board has dropped from where they were before in the context of CSGO, and even compared to other top teams, like you look at the team now that NiP has, and it's hard to go through each member and really say that they're the best at their role. In fact, if you look at their team man for man, I don't think you could say that any player on NiP is the best at his role anymore. A couple of them might still be top 3, might be top 4, but even then, some of them's pushing it. So as a team, their overall level's down a bit, even though they're able to win and still have good results. But in terms of as a team man for man, the level's not as high as it was before. It wasn't just that they were winning, it's that even player for player, and in terms of the roles in the team, they had absolutely one of the best lineups you could possibly put together in the whole world. So now that it's dropped down a bit, it feels like that's part of the reason why not only do we see NiP Magic all the time, but it's necessary. They need NiP Magic to survive now. They need NiP Magic to get to the later rounds of tournaments. They need NiP Magic to get past a team on a certain map that's stronger for the opponent and on paper should be a win for that team. They need the NiP Magic. It's the main thing that they seem to rely on. I think it first manifested, if I think back through all the historic games that they've played, it really did first manifest at ESL 1 Cologne. Because this was the first tournament where NiP was weakened. They'd already been weakened at ESEA LAN Season 17 LAN, which was the one where... Actually, that's the wrong way. It was Season 16 LAN, which was the first time they ever placed outside the top 4. Then they went to the Gfinity tournament and they got beaten convincingly by Dignitas in the round of 8. These two tournaments where NiP hadn't just dropped a little bit, they dropped off being the best team in the world to suddenly being a team where it's like, it looked like they weren't even going to place in a top 4 of the tournament. So they come to ESL 1 Cologne and they get smashed in the group stage by Epsilon. And then we had this miraculous run where they just edged out Cloud9, somehow managed to beat them in that legendary Cobble game 16-14 in a scenario on the last round where they had like half buy and they're in positions where you could easily get swarmed. Forest's position at the back of the site, 9 times out of 10 they just run in there, 3 of them they take you down, it's over. But they got all these miraculous rounds and we really start to see this is where NiP Magic really came forwards. It's not just a one-off thing, but something that somehow they were able to rely on in big tournaments and get wins over teams that actually were playing better than them, had a map advantage a bit over them. Teams like LDLC in that tournament, you looked at the way that Cobble game was going, you thought LDLC was going to win this. In the final, Inferno, historically we've seen how great that map's been for Fnatic later, but somehow NiP miraculously do that comeback towards the end to be able to win on that map. This is when it really came back to the forefront, and that's a way it manifested, was in them being able to win on maps that they're actually weaker than the opponents on, or to put it in a more reasonable manner actually, they're weaker, but that actually is just to describe it from NiP's reference point. The more important way to phrase it is they were able to get wins on maps which are the strongest, not only for the opponent that they're playing against, but those teams are the strongest in the world on that map. So here's a few examples that you can immediately think of. NiP has never been known as a good cash team, and yet NiP has beaten in the last couple of tournaments. They beat Fnatic on cash at MLGX Games in the semi-final. They beat Envy on cash, a team who's been wrecking people on cash. They smashed them on it at this last tournament, obviously, at ESL 1 Katowice. They beat them in the semi-finals there. They managed previously... Oh, the same tournament, they beat Envy on Dust 2 as well. That's another map that's really good for... Envy are the best team in the world on that map. TSM have famously always, and it continues, been a very strong team on Nuke. And not only were they able to win on Nuke, but they were able to come back on the T side, which is the hardest side. So we can see there, this is NiP Magic in full effect, because these results don't even make the sense in the context of A, their opponent, who are very, very strong on these maps, as everyone, and B, NiP, because NiP aren't particularly strong on these maps. Cash is not one of NiP's best maps. Dust 2 is not one of NiP's best maps. Nuke is not one of TSM's best maps. I mean, think about Nuke. On Dust 2, that was the map they'd lost to Envy in the final of Dreamhack Winter and the final of MLGX Games Aspen, but they're able to get it when it's at Katowice. This NiP Magic allows them to stay in big games that they're losing. So think about the Fnatic game that just happened now, the decider in the final of ESL 1 Katowice. When you look at the score, it was so close to the score at the end of the map, you'll think to yourself, NiP was in it with a chance to win all the time, it must have just been like a close game. No, if you actually watch the way the game played out, Fnatic's massively ahead, Fnatic's winning constantly, Fnatic's in position where it's like, it's 90% sure they're going to win, 95% sure they're so far ahead that eventually they only have to grind out like 2 rounds in something like 10 to play, and they're going to win. Now that's just going to happen. You have to be a miraculous team to be able to put it up like that. Not only that, but historically, what's interesting about how strong NiP's been on Inferno is that when they've had all these big wins over other teams, it hasn't just been uber godlike CT halves that totally shut everything down. Actually, NiP's CT half has been a little bit weaker. It's usually been how many T rounds they're able to get, actually, which is impressive on Inferno. So they're faced with the scenario of having to play pure CT almost flawlessly if they want to win the map in regulation. In fact, yeah, have to win every round, and close to flawless if they want to just get to an overtime. So a normal team, even a great team, an Envy or a Virtus Pro, even them, most of the time in that sort of a scenario, they're going to make one slip up here, or they're going to have one key death in a round that's going to throw off their chances of winning the round, and then mentally that will get to them. It's not that they'll break all of them and that everyone's mentally weak. They'll just be like normal teams. They won't be able to summon the mental fortitude to be able to continue on. But somehow in that game, you just knew that, okay, listen, Fnatic's going to win it, it seems like, but there's no way NiP's going to let them win it. As in, NiP's not just going to give up and like acquiesce to victory. Like, there you go, you just take the trophy. You knew somehow NiP would be able to hang in there, would be able to get some little edges that would mean that Fnatic would really have to take those last 2 rounds. It was never going to just be gifted to them by a NiP player looking the wrong way and get killed in a 1v1, or the site just getting completely overrun and it never going to a 1vx situation. Instead, you got all these 1vx, 2vx over and over and over that would play out, where the NiP players would have this gusto somehow about them. They would have this ability to stay in the game and to think that each could make this key play. And that's what allowed the game to actually get to the point where at the end, the scoreboard looked like, wow, NiP was so close. But they had to win all these miracle rounds, amazing, magical rounds, to even get to that point. But they could do it. And you somehow felt like they were going to do it no matter what. So they don't give up, they don't mentally crumble. That's part of the NiP magic. Even the aura seems to affect them themselves in a way that doesn't in certain other tournaments that they can play in. Allows them to do comebacks in seemingly impossible situations. I talked before when they had Fifth Laren about that ridiculous comeback when they were against Cloud9's the obvious one, and then you go to the final against Fnatic was a pretty amazing one. Then go to Dreamhack Winter, and you had that comeback they did when they were down at match point on Nuke, and they didn't let a single T round go to Virtus Pro, so it went to overtime and they were able to beat them there. That was an incredible comeback. They obviously had... They started to do a crazy comeback in this game against Fnatic in the final. At the same tournament, ESL won Katowice. They had that amazing comeback against TSM, where it's the deciding map, map 3. They've been smashed by TSM on map 2. Inferno, what we thought was NiP's best map. They go on to Nuke. They're losing. It's on T side. They're going to have to grind all these rounds out, and they do. They get all these miracle wins, insane wins. That crazy win Forrest had at when he was down with the bomb on lower. Unbelievable rounds on the hardest side to come back on, as the second side as well, in the third map of a game. Like, that's almost like gifting Dignitas TSM a chance to, like, okay, get past it without any choking or whatnot. You're on the easier side with all the weapons, but NiP manages to do it somehow. We've seen it with Makleli, with Alu. I think this general quality, this weird effect that they seem to have, both on themselves, like somehow knowing that this guy will make a key play even if I slip up here, so you don't get worried, it doesn't crumble, it doesn't erode your confidence as you're going forward as a team, as would happen naturally to a lot of people. You get a sense as a competitor if you're going to lose, like, okay, things aren't really going my way, like I tried here, somehow it just doesn't go. Things like the NiP players in the big tournaments, that never seems to get to them somehow. It's part of how they've made it to all these finals. It's what makes them the most exciting team. Now, I won't say the most entertaining team, because I think part of being entertaining can be things like, in Counter-Strike context, can be things like have the best player who's consistently playing very well, like Kenny S or Olofem, Crims, JW, whoever it is, these guys who always have the highlight performances. Or entertaining might be like style of play. So Fnatic's CT side is very entertaining, the way it formulaically plays out, and they can repeatedly do these things over and over. Or the way Titan can just get these terrorist halves against teams on their best maps that no one else can. With NiP, it's like there's not anything predictable about how it'll play out. You don't know when the 1vx will come out. You don't know which half of which of the opponent's strong maps it'll happen on. But somehow when it happens, it's so exciting. That round that Freiburg won, that 1v2 as CT on Inferno against Fnatic in the deciding map of the final, to keep them alive on match point, that was utterly unreal. Like, that, you can't even imagine stuff like that, and it's so exciting, and it comes out of nowhere, yet at the same time, once it happens, it feels like, oh, you just knew that would happen somehow. I don't know where it was going to come from, but the magic would manifest. You want to talk about when they're playing teams like Envy, they're playing teams like Fnatic. The most dangerous thing about these teams is that these teams don't actually need to win 1vx against you. When they're on their game, they just either put up a brick wall on CT side where you run into any site on Dust 2 or Inferno, depending on which team, or Mirage. So if we're talking about Envy, Cash, or Dust 2, they can just put up these defensive CT sides where it feels impossible. You get demoralized just trying to do strats and attack somewhere because it fails so badly. You don't even get a bomb plant. You don't even get into 1vx. You just die. They have 3 or 4 guys still alive, and everyone on your team's dead and instantly mowed down. When that happens, it's so demoralizing. Likewise, on T side, when these teams do get entries, like if Envy get 1 or 2 entries, they're just going to take the whole site over and destroy everyone. If Fnatic makes the right read, they're going to get into a site that only has maybe one CT in it because of a gamble rotation over, and they're going to get in there or against two, and they're going to totally sweep it. So as a result, these teams don't even need the close rounds to win these big games. That's something that's to be said here, because when NiP's played against Envy and played against Fnatic, even in series which, well, Envy's won those two finals and Fnatic won this final now, but when they beat Fnatic, and even when they lost to them, even when they beat Envy now and they lost to them in those previous finals, in both scenarios, NiP's getting to all these close round situations, and those are the ones that NiP's winning. They're winning all the 1v1s, the 2v2s, the 2v3s, where they have the 2 and the opponent has the 3. They're the ones they all win. When it's the closeout, rollover, or massive defensive wall style, NiP's the one who loses those scenarios. That's a key point to make here, because this amazing play from Get Right, from Freiburg, from Exist. Freiburg will have that key triple on a CT half at a close range position. Exist will win that amazing 1v2. Get Right will have either the impossible 1v3 win, or he'll just suddenly out of nowhere have 4 rounds in a row where he mows everyone down. These scenarios that play out in this particular way, it's not like these guys have amazing maps where, oh, you just knew he was going to dominate on Inferno and this guy would always win at that situation on Dust 2. No, you don't know. Again, even their best performances are coming in these close round situations, these magical scenarios where average players, even for the top level, just aren't going to win these rounds. Even some of the world's best players aren't going to. They're going to crumble once they get to these scenarios. This is what will sound weird, because people are going to think to themselves, you just talked about how magical it is and how they always win those scenarios. Okay, so let's think logically. If they're winning all these 1vx and 2vx situations and they're always getting those rounds, why didn't they win Dreamhack Winter? Why didn't they win MLGX games? Why didn't they win ESL 1 Katowice? Here's the thing, because they have to rely on that magic. That's what I've kind of made the point of here. It gets them back in games, stops them getting run over in games, it allows them to win, steal a map from the opponent, which is a strong map for the opponent. Like, think of how many map draws there've been where NiP was actually facing a scenario where all 3 maps were strong for the opponent, or the first 2 were 2 of the strongest for the opponent, and in a normal world, the opponent would 2-0 you. But they get to that 3rd map even if they lose. This magical aspect that's happening for them, mainly in big tournaments or against big opponents in Best of X, the problem with it is, because they rely on it, because it's so necessary to what's allowing them to even get this far and have any success, that's also, believe it or not, one of the reasons why they're not winning big tournaments and why it doesn't look yet like they will win the big tournament, because they rely on it. They don't have those rounds where if they get to a semi or a final and versus one of these world-class top 2 or top 3 teams, they're not having halves where they just dominate completely. They're not having rounds where they run in, kill everyone in the site, and you know that they can do that 3 rounds in a row and totally crush the enemy and demoralize them and have no chances. They're not having those CT halves where they're just total lockdown, the opponent can't get anything. In that game there, where NiP did get a lot of CT rounds on Inferno, Fnatic, even in the rounds they were losing, were always getting entries, always getting bombs down, always getting into 2vx. And yes, NiP could win them, but that style of play, unfortunately, won't make you a world champion. Like, you could win one tournament, you could have an amazing tournament, almost Virtus Pro-esque, where everything goes for you and you win it, it's like, wow. But consistently, it's actually going to lead to a Virtus Pro style type of record. Lots of top 4s, maybe you're going to have some finals, maybe you'll have an epic win in the quarterfinals or semi-final, but you're not going to win a final. The problem is, it's not as consistent, because it's relying on magic. It's relying on things that shouldn't happen every day, that don't happen every day, even for you. Now, yes, when they happen, it's incredible and it's so exciting to watch, and we all get caught up in it, and we're like, wow, how are they doing this again and again? How do they make all these finals? But actually, unfortunately, that's exciting, okay? The most exciting style. What wins you games and championships in the long run consistently is fairly boring. It's having a formula, it's having a player who plays this role consistently well, it's having someone you rely on every CT half on this map, he's going to give me this. On every T half, this guy's going to get this particular kill. Knowing how you'll win, knowing the win conditions for you and the opponent, that's what will actually win you championships in the long run. You look at any of the greatest teams of all time, the old NiP that didn't rely on the NiP magic so much, the very games that came after them and unseated them and had that sick run of tournaments leading into the other Dreamhack. You look at Fnatic now when they've been on top. Even this little brief spell where Envy was on top, they had these consistency at the roles. They had consistency on halves and specific maps they could win. Envy less so, but they only had 2 events they won. You look at it and there's consistency and it's formulaic and it's predictable. That's it. That's why it's not as exciting and magical, because it's predictable. Unfortunately, in NiP's case, they don't have that as much. The same team, think of it this way, there's a chauvinism that goes into analysis, unfortunately from fans, where what they'll do, essentially, I understand why they overrate their favourite teams and players, because what they'll do is look at when the player had his one best half, or the team had their one best half, or one map they played that they won, and they'll go, this team is the best. Like, if they play like that every game and they don't make mistakes, then they'll never lose. It's like, no, but you have to ask the other way. Is the way they played there their normal everyday level? If it's not, then you can't bank on it to happen every day. That's the whole problem. And so actually, what you might look at as mistakes otherwise might be the sort of action that they would perform on an everyday basis. The incredible 1vx they won might be the outlier. That might be something that only happens every now and then. In this particular sense, you have to think to yourself like this. Okay, so NiP almost won ESL 1 Katowice. You can't deny this. They were close to winning in 2 maps. On the 3rd map, they got all that great comeback, and then they lost. It feels like, oh, they were so close, they could have done it. Yes, there are worlds in which NiP is now the champion of ESL 1 Katowice. But you know what? There are also many worlds in which NiP does not make it to the semi-finals. They lose that 3rd map convincingly to TSM, or they lose that 3rd map by a couple of rounds to TSM, or they lose that 3rd map even on the last 2 rounds to TSM, and TSM goes into the semi-final, and we're all saying, was it Alu who came in, or what happened to NiP, what was going on there? Those are equally, in fact, some of those are more likely possibilities. Now let's go into the semi-finals. In the semi-finals, this was actually one of the few series I've seen in big tournaments where it wasn't NiP Magic, actually. In this particular scenario, Envy, it looked like, contributed a lot to it by playing below their normal level, and NiP was just playing their good level, and it was enough to run over them. It was one of the rare series you've seen with NiP since McLaren left, where they were able to just run over a team. In this particular scenario, though, does that happen every time they meet in these alternate universes where all possibilities play out? No. Some of those scenarios, that map pool is very good for Envy. Some of them, Envy 2-0s them. Some of them, maybe it goes to 3 maps, like the Dreamhack Winter Final, like the MLG Final. Maybe Envy's playing in something close to the form they'd had there, which was fairly consistent in general, and maybe Envy can win some of those. So many things had to happen, so many magical things in the round of 8, in the semi-finals, even in the final. All this magic had to happen just to get NiP that close to almost win and not win. If even one thing goes differently, we're talking about round of 8 elimination, semi-final elimination, losing 2 maps in the final. You can't just say, I'll take all the magic here, I'll take the amazing thing here, could I have one more? Can I have one more miracle? I really should have one more. Miracles are every day for me. No, these are miraculous, these are incredible. One of the reasons to go along with this NiP Magic, as to why it's so miraculous, is that a key thing that NiP lacks, which usually would prevent you from getting to finals like this in big tournaments, is that they don't have a home map. Not only do they not have a home map that you know that they can win on, and that if they get that map versus anyone, they're going to win that map in the series at least and go to 3, at worst. But they also don't even have a consistent best map. You can't even look at NiP's map pool and go, oh, that's the best map for them. For them. I'm not even saying in the series. Like, it's not like if they play against VP, oh, well, they'll win this map. No. Which is the best map for NiP? I mean, I would have said Inferno, like a lot of you, because they managed to come very close to beating Fnatic, even though they haven't. Except at fucking ESL 1 Cologne. They obviously beat Envy on it. You'd think, okay, they beat Virtus Pro on it, they beat Hellraisers on it, they beat Envy on it at the Dreamhack Winter Final. You'd think, right, this must be NiP's best map then. Inferno is NiP's best map going forwards, and then they just get completely rickrolled on it by TSM, to the extent that you're like, what? I didn't even think TSM were some gods on this map, and suddenly they're smashing NiP on it. That's unreal, so can't really say that. NiP's had all these wins on Cash now. Envy, Fnatic. Is Cash their best map? It's pretty hard to say when you think back in history. I mean, that's a map in the past that they've had massive problems on. Is Dust 2 their best map? I mean, they only narrowly beat Fnatic on it. This is a map that tends to require miracles for them to win on. What is NiP's best map? At the moment, it's very hard to say. You can pick the one that has the best win rate, but that's about it. I don't know that the qualities that they have tell you what their best map is. So actually, they rely on NiP Magic and winning these unlikely wins on opponents' best maps to get through these series and to have a chance. What I would contrast this NiP Magic with is interesting, because here's what's weird. Forest and Get Right to a degree have had in their careers this stretch where they make all these major finals throughout their careers, but they win them quite rarely. They win them on average something like a third of the time. So if they make 9 finals, 12 major finals, they're only going to win 3 or 4 titles. Now you might think, well, you make a lot of finals, you're not going to win them all. No, that's the thing. In CS 1.6, we had a team who used to make all these finals and win 2/3 of them. They were winning way more than NiP did. These were the Poles: Neo, Taz, Cuban, Lord, Luke originally, and then Pasha came in to replace him. The 2 different Golden 5 lineups we're talking about now. Now these teams, what was the interesting quality about them is they basically had back then what NiP has now with the NiP Magic. Their team in nearly all eras, never had the best players at all positions. They had Neo, who's a god, but the others, actually, many of them weren't even top 3 or 4 at their positions. They didn't have the best players. They didn't have the best skill level. They didn't have the best map setups. Like, for example, they could be really strong on Nuke, but you know who was stronger on Nuke? The Swedish teams. They could be really strong on Train, but who's stronger on Train? Na'Vi, the Danish teams. They never had the strongest aspect here. They didn't have the strongest players. They didn't have the strongest roles. How did they win? Well, it wasn't called NiP Magic back then. I used to have my own term for it. I used to call it Polish power. The idea was, when it got down to a tournament, they would somehow hang in these games. And they would somehow get every round, T-side or CT side, into a 2-on-3 or a 2-on-2 or a 1-on-1 or a 3-on-2. Some kind of broken round where the tactics have gone and the setups have gone and you're just playing it out man for man off your teammates and against what the opponent might be doing. Once they could get into these situations, they had a magical quality about them. Somehow, players who were much lesser, like they could have Get Right against Lord. The skill differential there is incredible. Get Right is 10 times the player Lord is. But Lord won some enormous 1v1s against Get Right to win those rounds. Forrest is a million times better than Cuban. But you put Cuban against Forrest in the 28th round of a 14-14... Well, I can't remember. The 29th round of a 14-14 game in the third map decider on a map that's NiP's on... well, it'd be SK at the time. That SK were on the stronger side, and I'll put my money on Cuban to win that 1v1. It's just going to happen. They had the composure. They had the miraculous scenarios. And so as a result, they would win these big majors. They would get to these big major finals when they weren't expected to. They wouldn't win as many small tournaments as a result, because they actually weren't as good a team as some of the opponents they were playing. They weren't as consistent a team. Their level wasn't overall as good. They relied on the magic. Now, interestingly, NiP's manifests a different way, because they're making a lot of finals, but they're not winning as many. Now listen, CSGO is a different game from 1.6, so I wonder, it makes me wonder actually, if this was 1.6, would this quality of theirs be able to help them win tournaments? Whereas CSGO seems a bit more skill-based, so I understand why these skill-based teams tend to get it over them in these finals, because they've only won 1 out of these finals. With that said, in similar fashion, you shouldn't really blame NiP for not winning these major finals. Like I say, that to some degree, some of these tournaments they're overperforming in. Think about it. The 5 finals they've been in. The first one, Dreamhack Winter 2013. To a very minor degree, they overperformed because they beat Very Games, who at the time had beaten them in 3 straight series. So that's a little bit of an overperformance, but it's not really, because they were the 2 best teams in the world. NiP goes to the final. Okay, you expect them, they're big favourites to beat Fnatic in that final. They didn't. So that's like an upset. Yeah, they probably should have that one if you're talking about just on paper. They should have had that one. So that would have been 1, but they didn't have any then. Then you go to the EMS 1 Katowice final. It's probably closer to 50-50 in that final. NiP was playing very well. They still were a top 2, top 3 team in the world. But Virtus.pro was in phenomenal form there. They had looked incredible coming into the final. It's understandable they lose that. Let's say that was a 50-50. So at the moment they got 0 titles out of these 2. But there's only like 1.5 value to have won out of those. It's okay to have even won 1, but they were at 0. ESL 1 Cologne, well, we know the way that tournament played out. They weren't a favourite at any round of the tournament. They probably shouldn't have won it, but somehow they did snatch that one. That time, actually, NiP Magic did prevail. They won 1. Okay, they're only on par for about 1.5 so far, and they've got 1. That's fine. Dreamhack Winter 2014 final. Again, they weren't expected to get there. Hellraisers was incredible form. They beat them very convincingly. Virtus.pro looked strong. The map pool was great for Virtus.pro. NiP got past them. In the final, it was Envy. Envy's the only team Envy was going to lose to in Best of X at that time was Fnatic, and they didn't. They got to the final. They managed to just lose in narrow fashion. That's incredible in itself. So actually, they weren't expected to win that final. That's fine that they didn't. You get to this final now. Again, they're not expected to win this final. It's fine to have lost. Yes, it's amazing they got so close and all the rest of it, but they weren't expected necessarily to make... I mean, listen, I would say that it was at least 50-50 in the round of 8. They were probably a slight favourite because of TSM's famous choking. So, okay, let's say they get past TSM as they should. On paper, they're supposed to lose to Envy there. They lost the last 2 best of 3s to them. The map pool's great for Envy. Now go to the final. They're supposed to lose to Fnatic in terms of history, how the map pool plays out. It's looking like Fnatic on paper can 2-0 them here. It's amazing they get to 3 maps. It's amazing they win cash off them. You go to that scenario there. The 5 finals they've played in, realistically, there's only 1 that they were supposed to win. The EMS Katowice won the other one. Okay, maybe that was a half. So at most, they're only supposed to have 1.5 out of the 5 titles. They've got 1. That's still pretty good. So I wouldn't say it's exactly like they're failing here. But this magical quality, as great as it is to watch, in general isn't going to make you the best team. Because what's interesting is, I look at these other teams that have had it. I'll contrast it to another game here. 2 teams that spring to mind are League of Legends teams. So Gambit Gaming had this quality where even against amazing Korean teams, they could do these crazy one-off games and win. They could do crazy comebacks, or one player could play it way above his normal level. Darian's a good example, where you didn't expect him to do that, but he could just suddenly summon some amazing game. They would get these sick fights where like it seems chaotic, but they always come out on top. But if you think about it, when Gambit Gaming were at their best doing that, it was when they were Gambit Gaming after the M5 era. As Moscow 5, they were the dominant best team for a while. It wasn't until the Gambit era when they were getting put in these disadvantageous situations against better teams with picks that favour the enemy. That's when the magic really came out, when Gambit Gaming had the incredible comebacks and sick things that we really think of. Them dominating was quite different. Likewise, Cloud9 in North America. Now, Cloud9 didn't have an era where they were purely dominant in that same sense, because it's not that they ever had all the best players and they were like the best team in the whole world. But in North America, they dominated to a degree. But even within that period, people would get them behind early. They would have these nice comebacks. But we really saw the most extreme comebacks in magical play from Cloud9 as TSM got better than them, as other teams got better than them, as the international competition was always better than them. So now they really had to summon everything about their cool decision making and ability to come back and not giving up mentally and being able to play against certain picks that are strong for opponents normally, but they can somehow find a way to deal with it. That's when we really saw it. It was when they were beaten down, they were in this scenario. Because in sports in general, this actually happens in all the great players' careers. They have the era when they're on the come up, where their skills are really amazing. They have the era where they're dominant, they're on top, they're winning everything. But then they have the era just afterwards. And so I'm thinking of like the Celtics in the 1980s, where they'd won those 3 titles, but they're still hanging around. They're still making Eastern Conference Finals. They're still making it far, even though they're not going to win another title. Now at this point, maybe its physical athleticism's gone downhill. So think of that in skill as a equivalent in games. But you've got the veteran wiles, you've got the composure and confidence that comes from having won so many times, having been in that difficult situation and overcome it, or lost and learned from it. They've got that quality where they can still have an amazing game, like when they beat the Hawks in the finals of the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals, this amazing duel between Bird and Dominique Wilkins. They can have these amazing comebacks and clutch veteran plays, but in general, that's the era when they're relying on that, then they're not going to win. They're going to lose to whoever's the best team at that era, who exploits the meta the best, has the best players, has the best overall roles and team cohesion together. That's the team that in general is going to get ahead of them. And so it's an interesting phenomenon, the NiP Magic, because hey, it's very exciting. I don't want to see it end because it makes for great games. Same with those teams there. That's why I love to watch Cloud9 play in League of Legends. But it's also, when it's that prevalent and that necessary and that relied upon, seems unlikely you're ever going to either win more than one big tournament. Like, you might win one when everything goes perfect, and especially if an opponent helps you by playing badly. But it's unlikely you're ever going to be the best team playing that style, just because its necessity grows out of being in all these unfavourable situations, not having a home map, opponents being stronger than you skill-wise, opponents having better distribution of roles, being in situations where you're not even favoured to get through this round. NiP Magic is incredible to watch, but I don't know that you can rely on it.